So, one of the things I know I've heard anyway is that some of you are very anxious about sketching and what all this means and how to go about doing it and so on. So, relax, sit back, and enjoy. No, there's some what I thought I would do today is just go over some basic principles, and also just encourage, think about like why is sketching so important today when we've got all these amazing cameras on our phones and all this videos and all these other kinds of things available to us on the internet. Why is sketching so important? And so I want to talk a little bit about that and as it relates to memory and kind of as I alluded to earlier, the way you map things in your memory and through actually doing some physical things. And then I thought I was originally thinking we might do some sketching in here, but on the way in today I thought, there's a really terrific place in Old Main in that big central space for us to go and work there. So we'll talk a little bit about later on about what we're going to do there, but I thought that's where we can walk down there and get to know or get to kind of experience the kind of similar size spaces to the things we're going to be looking at in Italy. So anyhow, there's interspersed through here are a number of different kinds of sketches, and it can get very intimidating looking at everyone's different ways of doing things, and it's one of these things where it's like getting in shape or being or riding. You don't just pick up a pencil and go. I mean, you can do that, but obviously the more you draw, the more facility you get, and it's great. It's terrific because you get really quick feedback. You can kind of the more you do it, the better you get, I guess, bottom line. So, and it's something you can kind of pick up and get back into later on. I think one of the things I always find interesting, because I have sort of a pile of sketchbooks going, is going back and looking at sketchbooks well after the fact, and going like, oh wow, where was I then? Or remembering when you made that particular sketch, and then looking at it with new eyes, like almost like a third person. So I think that those are kind of the keys to memory and so on that sketching, I think, holds for us. So one of the things I did was I found, digging through my old files back, probably this was done, for us by Paul Gershorn in like the late 80s or early 90s. And this was before computers, before SketchUp and Revit and everything. There's a 1-point and 2-point technique for how you can generate three-dimensional drawings from a plan and section. And this was the way you kind of did it. And I know when I was starting out in an office, this was, I kind of gravitated to this pretty early on, and it was really terrific because being able to see things in 3 dimensions, got you involved with, working closely with partners and presentations and those types of things. So, but the sort of most fundamental technique is this 1-point perspective, which is which we'll look at a little bit. But you'll see here, it's really kind of based on working with an elevation and then having a singular vanishing point. In this case, this is kind of going through the basic principles of it. And I'll kind of leave you guys to look at this because I don't think this to myself necessarily every time I sit down with a piece of paper. But I think once you review this and begin to kind of understand mechanically how things go, then you can, then it helps you actually see what it is that you want to draw and how you want to go about drawing something. So the thing I think to remember about 1-points is that you're basically taking a flat plane and giving it depth through the use of a singular vanishing point. You can see these are the basics in the plan, and the station point is where the viewer is, where you have a kind of cone of vision, which is what you can kind of wherever your peripheral starts, it's kind of outside of that 60 degree. So it's kind of, this is what I'm looking at here. And then I think one of the keys is to to doing 1 points is after, this is kind of assuming a symmetrical kind of setup. But it's really interesting if you move the vanishing point around on a flat elevation, you can get all kinds of interesting dynamic things begin to happen and make it, give it more dynamism, and actually kind of move you more towards this other version of the 2-point perspective. So I'll just, feel free to interrupt me anywhere along the line here, but just ask questions. But this was a really great little primer that we started off with, and this was certainly stuff I was doing when I was and so let's look at what is at 1 point, and part of what I went through and kind of found some interesting photographs, and it's very clearly this is that symmetrical kind of right down the middle. It's slightly off the middle, but what you see here is this is a very important line. It's called the horizon line, and in the beginning, I think when you draw, it's always really good to, although you can do it from any kind of, you can do it from the vantage of a bird, or even they call them worm's eyes, like down at the ground level looking up. But I think for starters, it's always really good to think about, the way you perceive is through your eyes here. So if you're at about, 5, 6, or 8, or whatever, or 5'2", or something like that, there's a line in here where your eyes are. And when you look at anywhere across this line, that's where your eye aligns with the horizon line, which is an important kind of concept to remember. And so this is the first example of that. And that vanishing point is way back there, so it's kind of near this person's head. And one of the other really interesting things about this too is that all of these points of convergence, they all come together and they actually align at the horizon. So those are two really important concepts to remember, and will help you kind of begin to think about how you want to organize a view when you're looking at something outside. Okay, here is this is a Corbusier, French architect, and a villa that he did in Germany as part of an exposition. But the reason I picked this is that it's obviously a perspectival view, but here you see the elevation more or less flat, like it's like it is an elevation, and so from the perspective, you can actually figure out where the horizon line is by these points of convergence that I'm kind of, the clue I'm learning from is just these diagonals in the shot, and they all kind of come back to a point about here, which is I know where the horizon line wants to be. So it's kind of interesting because you can see, or you can imagine, the photographer, this was probably even done on a tripod or whatever. It was set at a particular height, and that it's about at that zone. And even when you look at kind of the clues beyond, you can tell this is on a hillside, obviously, but the horizon, that kind of makes sense about where the horizon wants to be. Okay, so you can imagine beyond there that being a kind of a level plane in there that your eyes are looking towards. So, and conversely, this is inside one of the rooms inside of this villa. And the same thing, the same principles apply. You can really see how, just by the lines of convergence, you can figure out where that single vanishing point is. And then from this, these are really, this is well, back here really is like a flat elevation that you're looking from. And then you can generate all of these elements. And there's more detail in what in some of the things I've uploaded here that allow you to, using the plan and projection and so on, be able to locate elements that are in front of that flat plane, and so that you can create a closet and bed and all those kinds of things. But these are just, it's probably one of the very first things I'm doing when I'm thinking about looking at an image, and I'm going, okay, is this a 1-pointer or a 2-pointer? Let's keep it simple. We'll do a 1-pointer, and this is kind of how, where I'm going to, imagine how I'm going to begin to put marks down on the page to illustrate that. Okay, and this is actually a villa that we're going to go see, I hope, depending on how things go. And again, you can kind of just, by finding these points of convergence, and also little clues, this of course doesn't, one of the best ones is always where's a person's head, and when I want to draw, this is basically an elevation. But one of the things I'm always looking for, and I had a sense of it, although I think that this does sit up a little bit, so where the camera was set is probably down a little bit lower. But I'm looking and seeing the size of a potted plant, and I'm figuring that the person is about that scale to begin with. And when I draw an elevation like this in the field, part of what I'm thinking about is, well, if a person, and I'm looking, where is a person walking by, and is there, are they at about that height? And then I'm going to look at that and then say visually, well, that's maybe this might be 3 people high, and then that's like a half a person or something like that. So I can begin to kind of just in a rough kind of way get the basic proportions of what I'm looking at, and then from this you can see I was looking at these lines of convergence. These are the big clues up here at the eaves, and then working back and saying, okay, well, once I've got this kind of roughly drawn out, and I know where I'm going to position myself kind of like this, although I could have made the decision as well to slide down here a little bit and have this there, and that would then have a different kind of effect. We'll look at that a little bit in a second. But I've kind of lined up and thought about just the mechanics of how we're going to do a one-point perspective in this kind of scene. So again, here's the horizon line, our old friend. We know that that's where my viewpoint would be. And later on, as well too, when we talk about entourage, like people and other elements within the drawing that help give it depth and scale, one of the things that's always really good to use is you can always imagine, well, here's a person standing here, and I know that their head's going to be about there, and their feet might be about there, and then here's a person at this point further in, and their feet are going to be out, I can work from that kind of center line and understand, this person about that tall, that person about that tall, and then about like that. That those are these kind of diminishing the scale of it related to that vanishing point helps give the drawing, which is a flat two-dimensional representation of depth, which is kind of what we're all looking to do, make these kinds of drawings. So, okay, so the very first thing I learned how to do was a one-point perspective. It was like, eureka! I had my Brunelleschi moment as a young person figuring out how to draw. That constitutes, I just read something that says like basically 90% of the drawings you're going to come across, or in most cases you're going to see, are 2-pointers. Okay, so we start 1-point baby step. It's okay, or the elevation. It's actually really good, when you're working on designs and interiors, to do 1-point perspectives, because you've kind of got the rough outline of what a room might look like, and then you can just in the corner, a little freehand sketch up in the corner of the drawing that you're working on. You can kind of rough out what that three-dimensional sense of that inside might look like. But the fact of the matter is that there's more to this stuff. The 2-pointer is probably what you're going to wind up dealing with more often. And just to look at that, I mean, this is kind of stock and trade of how all this stuff works. And part of this is, you can see, this is an object building in the landscape of some sort. And there's a line through here. And this line, you have control over. You can decide where you want to put it. The line is called the picture plane. Line through here. And wherever that intersects the object building, or either by physically intersecting it here, or even by, like, if you project over back to this line, both of those lines, when you go up in the plan, become points where you can measure, and you can say, okay, well, here's my 10 or 15 units, whatever it is that you're doing, and that will help then determine heights of things. So another important thing to see down here at the base, and this is where you start the drawing, in terms of laying it out, is that, and in this case it looks like it's a 30-60 triangle, but you can adjust to do whatever it is you want. these lines are parallel to, in plan to what's going on. And where they come back here and hit the picture plane, that's a vanishing point. And we call this VPL left, or vanishing point left, and vanishing point right over here. Okay? So, and then a lot of times you'll see, and in fact I have one of these giant triangles about this big. This was one of the things that was always, you know, like xerography was terrific because you didn't have to make these enormously big drawings, but you could do a layout of a drawing at a much smaller scale, so it kind of fit with the tools that you have, the lengths of things. Because one of the keys to this is always trying to keep those 2 points on your desktop, because a lot of times, depending on the angle, and we'll look at that as well, you'll see that this vanishing point, one of them could be way out in space, and so that could be, you know, kind of there are ways to compensate for that. So as we move then up through the drawing, here's our old friend horizon line through here, and we've got these measuring points that we can measure and begin to establish some heights. You know, and with this big long triangle that you've got, you say, like in this case, from your SP is your station point, and this is, you know, this is you as a person standing there looking at the object. You can take from that point to an intersection on the plan, and then you project directly up, and then that's how you got. This is how they've established the center of that elevation there. Okay, and then you can kind of follow through. It's all nicely done in the overall description of the various points and how you do it. But it's worth, I would say, for all of you just to get the hang of this, just doing a very simple little building type like this, just to kind of go, oh, okay, now I get it. Because you don't do this when you go out and sketch. You know, but part of what it is that we're training you how to see and how to translate what you see into a two-dimensional drawing. Okay, so these are kind of the key elements about how this was done, and this is all kind of, I think this is called was referred to as the office method, but it all kind of goes back to this the whole discovery of perspective as it related to painting and other things in Florence with our friend Mr. Brunelleschi. So I mean, this is it's heavy stuff. You know, it's very, you know, this was a huge breakthrough of being able to give depth in a two-dimensional drawing. So this is how it's come down to today, really. And so this is important for you all to see and to understand in sketching, because I think one of the, you know, this is sounding like a grumpy old fart here, but one of the things that happened when we moved away from really laying drawings out and things like this, you know, by hand and doing everything on the computer, is that there's a bunch of technique and tradition and things that kind of gets lost a little bit until you understand, you know, you have a better understanding of what's the history of what it is that you're involved with. So, this is what I was alluding to earlier, and these are in two-point perspectives. There's, you know, it's like flying an airplane, you know, like where the, you know, what the stick does in terms of your, you know, pitch and roll and yaw and all those kinds of things. So what this is describing is, you know, there's three variables. One is the angle, which is basically the position of the plan. So that's like, how do I rotate this way, right? The other is the relative height, and it has a relationship to the horizon line again. You can see in these diagrams, the variable is the horizon line. You know, so up, you know, the horizon line as it goes up here, it becomes more and more like a, you know, you're looking at the top of the building. It's a bird's eye. Here's where you are more or less with your feet on terra firma, and then this is actually, you know, being below, looking up. For instance, an object on a hillside or something like that. And then finally, the third element is distance, and that really has to do, it's like focus, you know, like how close into, you know, where's my station point? That kind of distance from the object, that kind of distance from the object, or that kind of distance. And you'll see, especially when we walk around an old medieval town like this, when you look up, I mean, you know, you're at a close distance, you get these amazing, like, you know, kind of perspectival effects that are all related to this, this kind of relationship of distance. And those are all kind of partially, your tools about, well, what are the things that, when I look at this, what is it that I want to remember about this particular circumstance? And that's where you'll make decisions about, well, where do I want to be positioned, and also where's their shade, and where's their comfort? Is there like a place I could sit down comfortably and look? And so these are all the kinds of tools and things that you're thinking about when you're looking for a place to draw and sit down. Comfort, that comes into play as well. And so then I just I showed you a couple of examples of what a 2-point's like, and this was actually a fairly common predicament for me because especially when you were doing renovations or additions and things like that to a building, you could get a photograph. This is again the core building in the Weissenhof estate, but quite often that this other this vanishing point is obviously, well, if I got this right, it's probably out here somewhere, so dealing with that, or at least recognizing what's going on there, to have a true correct appearing drawing. You have to, these are all the kind of techniques that you go through. So you've got vanishing point right, vanishing point left is out here somewhere. This is where I would, I would be shrinking it down to get it to something I can get on my desk, and it's also the length of my big triangle, so I can get that to where I want it to be. And then actually, and doing the drawing at a smaller scale in the office or whatever, it's great because you can just scan it and pull it up to whatever you need to do, and do all your post-production stuff afterwards. But the basics of how you organize and working from a photograph or even just working from sketches in the field is kind of around this, and it will be like a 2-pointer. And this is just an example of what happens on the interior of the building. And this is a little bit tighter. This probably has to do with the millimeter, the camera lens that they were able to get it the way they were here. But there's clearly 2 vanishing points that more or less picture plane, and they give you a good illustration of there'll probably be places like this where we could draw. So being able to kind of frame it and go like, okay, I can see there's that point, there's the other, will be very useful to you. Okay, so I just, as I alluded to earlier, sketches are about memory, and a lot of times they happen out of sequence. I'm going to show you something that looks like it's a perfect sequence, but they're actually sketches that have happened at different points in time. And it wasn't until I was kind of looking for images to show you guys afterwards that I kind of put a little story together about things that kind of to help illustrate a point about how to use drawing and sketch. But even at its most essential, one of the things that we're always bugging folks to do at the beginning of a project is to go out and find precedents. What are interesting projects that you could learn from? For whatever reason, I had come across, I know I was really interested in this guy, Rudolf Schindler, who was an associate of Frank Lloyd Wright. And we know that Wright actually trusted him quite a bit and was in the midst of doing the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo, so he was out of the country for a long time. And he gave Schindler this pretty nice commission to go take care of, which turned into the Hollyhock House, which is out near Los Angeles. And so Schindler, who had immigrated from Austria, so he had kind of the classic European education, immigrated to Chicago because he wanted to come to Chicago and kind of learn the American. And this is where the skyscrapers were at, this is where all the action was. And he also knew that he was hoping that he could go work for Wright and learn from him that way. So Schindler comes to America, and he had with him, he also had as a classmate from school days a buddy named, what's facing on his name right now? Neutra, thank you, Richard Neutra. And so Schindler, in the midst of coming out, getting his legs, and figuring out what to do about being an architect, and also a handy person who was kind of an early design builder type, came up with this idea for a house that actually I have never been to, but Rachel's been and visited it. And it's a one-story kind of bungalow kind of house, but it's a really beautiful site plan. And I was at one point looking at it, trying to get inspired about, I don't know, I was thinking it might have been for co-housing or something like some studio project we were working on probably. And the beauty of it was is that it had these kind of, two basic houses that were both L-shaped plans, and that each had their own spot of garden. But it also had, and this was like in 1922, so, this is like a long time ago, almost 100 years ago. They were thinking about, well, what can I do in here in terms of having, you have two guys from Europe, they're starting their families and their careers in America. They thought, oh, well, maybe what we can do is, we can live jointly on this piece of land and we'll build this thing, which they did. And then we'll have some shared resources like kitchen and a garage, there's a vegetable garden over here. But they each have their own kind of private space. They were architects, but also artists as well. They were married to people that were painters or sculptors. And they also had guests coming to visit them all the time. So they made a little guest house. So I was really interested in this whole complex and how it made, the kind of marvelous thing, I'm sure, that attracted Schindler to Los Angeles is the just relative, it's just incredible kind of, it never gets cold, It's like it gets dry, as we know, but it was a kind of near the sea, it was very moderately, kind of cool and very comfortable range, so you could live indoors and outdoors at the same time, and it kind of fit in with all of these ideas about modernism that were evolving at that time. So they kind of built this little dream house for themselves. And anyway, these were the sketches. Long story short these were the sketches I put together, and in the course of looking at it, began to kind of dissect. Okay, here's unit A, here's unit B, and then here are the kind of shared elements, and then here are the different kinds of actually rooms outside of the enclosed house that were all pretty neat. I thought, wow, that's great. And I came across it. I did it at some point and put the sketch away, started another sketchbook somewhere and just forgot about it, and then came back to it eventually later on. And part of it was, I think I was probably visiting friends, and it was a rainy day or something, and so I was looking at, I came across the old sketch again, and I thought, well, geez, how might you reinterpret something like this for a place near where we were staying on the East Coast? It was up in New Hampshire. And this, I did a little drawing of the camp that we were staying in. And then I started noodling on different, party sketches and thinking about that. Just thinking, and making little recordings and notes, sort of notes to myself. And then from that, these were actually drawings I did a little bit later on of the camp that I was staying in. But and actually, you could tell my hand was limber because I wasn't drawing in pencil; I was drawing in ink. So I was in good practice whenever I did this. I forget, it's probably 10 or 15 years ago. But look at one of the things that's happening right through here in the way I drew. What's that? A horizon line. And then and that was probably the first mark I made on the page. And then there's a bunch of other things that probably I did as first lines, just to kind of rough the outside. But then I was thinking about, well, what's the real, the thing, the focus of the drawing is really about the lake. And so that's where the greatest density and detail and stuff was. So, and that was like, it was a good drawing, actually. There were plenty of not such good drawings that preceded that or came after it. And then, and this might have been later in that same trip, but it was a rainy day. We were all kind of hanging out trying to figure out what to do. So we just sat and I just made a drawing. And again, it's maybe less, actually the thing you can really see here is I was like drawing the plane of the floor, and then I probably did this again, and although it's not explicit, there is a line kind of through here, which is the vanishing point. But I think I was probably leaning on a table or doing something like that, so it was close to about through there. And then from that, I just kind of, began, this is a one-point perspective, whereas actually this one is a two-pointer, because this is coming out here somewhere on that side, and then the other one is, I think you can almost see it right there, it's sort of the other point. So that's a 2-pointer. This is a 1-pointer. Okay. And then later on, probably after that trip, I found the old sketch again and did some more things, doodling over it. And so I was looking at a plan, alternative, and elevations and things. And then from that, did one of these bird's eye kind of sketches of, and you know, it was starting out with a plan and then projecting up from that. In this case, this is like a kind of strange 1 point, because the 1 point is down in the earth somewhere. So thinking about, you know, things like that. So this is after you get a little more familiar with what you want to do there. So, and then these were some more just sort of detailed sketches and thinking about something sitting in the landscape, iterations. You know, this was thinking about another way of organizing the two plans, and then looking at an individual unit, you know, and thinking about sort of flip-flopping and how that might work, but then looking at it as well as a three-dimensional object. So again, this is a 1-pointer, you know, really simple to do. Kind of, you know, start basically from an elevation back here and then project out from it. So, and you know, this is all, it's basically eyeball, you know, but it's based on you know, I didn't sit down and calculate it as the diagrams in the beginning showed, but you know, as you get more familiar with how to do this stuff, you get more comfortable. And these are, you know, are record drawings about memories or ideas that you have. And this is kind of the way, you know, you remember particular places. So I can remember kind of basically where I made this drawing and why. Another key element, I think, and this is something I talk to all the time these days with my architecture students, is there's this relationship which has gotten a little bit lost in the computer these days. But when you drew or you thought about an architectural project, you did everything basically on a single sheet. So you had plan, section, and elevation, and they all had a relationship to one another. So you have, you know, thinking about plan here, and then from the plan is the generator. Who said that? It was probably, you know, I forget, it was probably Sullivan or somebody like that. But plan is a generator, and then from that a section, which then kind of becomes a de facto elevation. And then from that, you fold off of that an elevation. So I was looking at sort of the front elevation here. You can see those relationships there to what's going on up here. And then just doing little vignette sketches around the edges about what things might look like. And then I see, and I always put a little note about where I did it, where I was doing, and actually there's a good TV show that was going to at the same time. But it was that I wrote down. I was visiting my mother's sister in Wales when I did this. It's like, wow, I remember that day, you know, and the things that you were thinking about at that time. So and that was just a little sketch I came across, which kind of really never amounted to much of anything, but you know, it was a way of kind of thinking about some issue that was on my mind. These are later when I was